hello, and welcome back to season 3 of the Lifeboat Live with me, absolutely Arian. And I am so excited for this new season, new era, new and improved Lifeboat Live. Um, it's been a while. We had quite a little bit of a hiatus, or not even a hiatus. It was just really an end of season. And we are back live and in action. And I'm excited to get into it with you guys. I hope you guys have been well since we last saw each other and that we had this last discussion. But we are back. Ashley says, glad for season 3. Thank you, Ashley. And Ashley has been a huge support, even in this transition, and just being a great sounding board and a help. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you are on here just like Ashley, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment. Make sure that you hit share. Send this over to your friends. Because tonight we are talking about victim blaming. And so I've seen so much of this recently in the media, especially if you guys have been up to date with what's going on with within pop culture. So if you've seen the Tinder Swindler, and if you haven't even seen that, maybe even just been in the comment sections on different blogs and seen what people are saying about things that are going on with Kim Kardashian and Kanye West as they're going through this divorce, and how people kind of receive the information about what's going on and how they perceive it, and kind of how they decode what's being put out there, and how we talk about victimology and victimhood, and how it can affect how we see people in situations, right? Hey George, thank you for joining. So I am not going to be long before you. I know we already started late because of unforeseen circumstances, but I am so glad that you have been patient with me, and I will not be before you too long. So let's just kind of get into it with a working definition. What is victim blaming? What is the definition? What does that sound like? What is it? All right. So I have it written here. Victim blaming is a devaluing act that occurs when the victim or victims of a crime or an accident are held responsible in whole or in part for the crimes that have been committed against them. Okay, so it's when people basically look at the person who has been affected by another person's actions and almost blame the affected person for being got by the perpetrator, right? And what are some reasons that people will victim blame? Some of it may be social bias and are sometimes based on sex, on race, on socioeconomic background, educational background. People make assumptions and kind of comparisons through the lenses of their own experiences or lack thereof, right? So not everyone also, you have to understand that it's not always so intense, right? Sometimes we don't even realize that we are victim blaming just based off of little minor things that we say. Not everyone engages in victim blaming explicitly, right? Or accuses someone of failing to prevent what happened to them, but it might come out and sound a little different, right? So it comes out in different forms and just kind of softer form. So people may not even always realize or be cognizant of the fact that they're doing it, but sometimes it's simple as hearing about a crime or thinking hearing about a crime and thinking that you would have done it, you would have been more careful, or you would have if it was you would have handled it differently if you were in the victim's shoes. And it's a mild form of victim blaming, right? Because you are somehow pitting yourself as superior, that you would have been superior in a situation that you may not have even lived through. So you don't really even have the data to even make that kind of assumption about your ability to avoid said crime, right? So, as I think a society, we sometimes have a problem with accepting that bad things happen to good people. Sometimes it's not always bad things that happen to bad people, and therefore we tend to lack, or we kind of look for a cause and reason for every event. Like if this happened, then there must have been a reason why it happened, right? There's always has to be a cause. There always has to be a reason for something happening. And so, as I was kind of like looking up, like why, because I'm just a curious person, right? And I'm inquisitive, and I'm gonna try to find out like why do we do these things, right? And so I was reading an article by a professor of social work at the Windermere University. Her name is Barbara Gillen, I believe is how you pronounce her name. And she made this quote, and I thought it was really interesting. And um, she said, murders, burglaries, abductions, whatever the crime. She said, whatever the crime, many people tend to default to victim blaming. Thoughts and behaviors as a defense mechanism in the face of bad news. So she says that while people tend to be able to accept natural disasters as unavoidable, many feel that they have little to or more control over whether they have become victims of crimes. So they say that they do that because they can take precautions. They feel like they can take precautions, that they will be able to protect themselves. Therefore, some people have a harder time accepting that the victims of these crimes didn't contribute to and bear some responsibility for their own victimization, right? So basically what she's saying is, or what she's suggesting is that there's a psychology behind victim blaming, right? So people can victim blame, or the reason why people victim blame can be because people use it as a defense mechanism. So it makes them feel safer, feeling that they would have been smarter and made better decisions, and therefore those things could never happen to them, right? So if you feel like you would have been in control, then you don't have to deal with the fact that that could have been you, right? And this may be triggered by just the human instinct and drive for self-preservation, right? We don't ever want to put ourselves or necessarily see ourselves as victims, because then that means that we could have got as well. And we always like to think that, and especially when we're looking at something from like an aerial, like when we're able to see something, like read it in an article or read it or watch it in a documentary, like we already have a bias. We already know who is a perpetrator and who is the victim. And so therefore, like the way that we kind of the way that we interact with that information is not the same way. Like it looks so obvious as we're reading it or as we're looking at it in a film, but it's not that obvious when it's actually happening to you all the time, right? So let's look into, hold on, oops, there we go. So let's look at what that looks like, right? When we need to, like, what we have to do to kind of get out of this like judge or this victim blaming way of thinking, right? And a lot of times we have to reframe the way we think about perpetrators and victims, right? Perpetrators are the ones who cause harm. Victim are the ones who are the receiver of the harm, right? And when I have looked through sometimes on Instagram or even like, blogs about like recent things that have happened in the media, like if most of us has seen the Tinder Swindler, right? And the Tinder Swindler, if you haven't seen it, I don't want to spoil it for you too much, but it's basically about this guy who is clearly a really malignant narcissist who, and I know narcissist is kind of a buzzword and we call everyone a narcissist as long as they're mean to us, but this guy is actually a real narcissist. And he scams like a bunch of women out of millions of dollars, like, you know, a couple of 100,000 here, a couple of 100,000 there. And he does this by going on Tinder and posing as a billionaire, a son of a diamond dynasty billionaire, and he finds these women on dating sites like Tinder, dating apps, and he meets them. He shows them that he has the means and he's a millionaire. He takes them on private jets, fancy restaurants, fancy hotels, fancy vacations, and does enough what we call love bombing to pull them in and drag them in, right? And so he tells them how much he loves them. He acts like, you know, this is grown man energy that I'm giving you, right? I know what I want. I'm a man of, you know, I'm a busy guy, and for me to take the time to be with you it means that you obviously mean something to me, and for me to give you my time. And so this is called love bombing, and it's usually very intense at the beginning of a relationship. And usually people who are narcissistic, who are typically predators, right? Predators will always try to find your weak spot, right? So this is why you have to be careful even when you're like meeting new people and stuff like that, because they are intentionally looking for your weak spots. And so they will act like they are curious about who you are and want to know, you know, your pain and your past trauma and all that kind of stuff. And they're not doing it because they care about you and they don't want to trigger you, but they'll pose as if that's what they're doing, right? But really and truly, this is information that they're gathering so that they can now use then to weaponize against you, right? Yeah. Evangelist Rohan, it's very messed up. You know what I mean? It's really, really a dark rooted thing. And so if you've seen Tinder Swindler, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, it's on Netflix, and it's a really, really interesting documentary about exactly what I'm talking about, right? And so this man uses these tools to prey on women who a lot of the times haven't really been exposed to much, right? Or there's women that are more vulnerable because they're searching for love and they want to find a partner to go, you know, to make their life with. And one thing that we have to understand about, like, sometimes when we get got by people like this is that you know, sometimes we think that, oh well, what is it about me that he saw that he thought he could do this to, or she thought she could do this to me. And the thing is that I want everyone to understand is that there is nothing specifically about you that drew them to you, right? A fisherman just throws out a net, right? And when he pulls it in, he doesn't necessarily know what he's pulling in. And in his net, he's pulling in seaweed. He's pulling in all kinds of different species of fish. He's pulling in octopus. He's pulling in whatever whatever was caught in the net, right? Some get out. Not everything gets stuck in the net, right? And so it just so happens to be that you may have been in a time in your life that's more vulnerable than any other time that you, like, they just caught you on the wrong day or the wrong month, right? They caught you at a time that you maybe had been a little lonely, and it just may be, you know, the difference between you and somebody else in that specific time in your life, right? And so so predators will look for that spot, right, and figure out who they can play with. And when they find that, they'll monopolize that, right? They'll go for that and make sure that they get you where they know that you're what, and when they know what you're looking for, right? And they'll be that. They'll put on the mask of whatever it is that you want. So that's why, like, I've even had lifeboats about this in the past, where I've talked about, you know, when you're first getting to know someone and they'll ask you things like, what are you looking for in a man? Like, you don't ever say what you're looking for, because if that person is a predator, if that person is only looking to waste your time or to get something from you, then they are going to become those things until they get what they want. So if you tell him that I want a man that is caring and this that, then he's going to be all those things. He's going to be caring, he's going to be you know loyal, he's going to give you all your time, all the things that you've told him that you want him to be, so that he can finally get whatever his motive is, right? So it's always best to just leave those questions blank. But to get back on track, right? um these women believed that they were in a relationship with this guy. His name was Simon Levi, right? That's what he went by. And they believed that they were in a relationship with him, and he played on their vulnerabilities, right? And he knew that they were he made them fall in love with him, per se, right? He treated them like they were princesses in the beginning. He gave them everything. He behaved like he was a billionaire. And then all of a sudden, what he did is he created a crisis, right? He needed their help. He needed to be rescued, right? And made those women feel like they were needed. And so, because they cared about him, because he had proven that he was good for it, he played a lifestyle of being this billionaire. For them, they felt like, when he was in trouble, he wasn't able to access his money because his enemies were after him. They wanted to help out their boyfriend or their friend in a time of need, because he had been there for them. He had treated them so well before. And so some of these women, some of them ended up giving him money. And it's not even just women. Some of it was men. There was all kinds of different people who got by this. Like hundreds of people came out and said that they had either given this man money, they had given this man loans, they had taken out loans for him, all kinds of stuff. And this man just ran a few $1,000,000 out of people on scamming them through relationship, right? Creating these false narratives for relationship. Hey, Deborah, thank you for joining. Good night. Good night. And so he did this on a regular. And so the documentary is just kind of going through these women's journeys and how they basically got played by this narcissistic predator. And when the documentary was over, there was so much commentary, even like in my group chat with some of my friends and different stuff like that. We talked about it, who watched it. We talked about it. And even in like the jokiness and just talking about the funny parts, a lot of the girls were just like he could have never, like, not me. She's better than me. We say that, but she's better than me, or it couldn't have been me. And we say those kind of things because we, a lot of us look at those women as foolish for taking out a loan of $25,000, putting credit cards in your name and all that kind of stuff to help out this man who says he's a billionaire. And so, he preyed on their kindness. He preyed on the good qualities in these people. And they believed that he was going to pay them back. And so, so many people in the comment sections of these different blogs and Instagram posts and all that stuff were like really berating these women, calling them dummies, saying that they deserved it, that they should have never taken out these loans, they should have never given him their money. They should have never this. And it's so easy for us to sit there and say that while we are watching through a screen, right? While we already know that this guy is a Tinder swindler, as the title says, right? And we're watching these women tell their story as they were innocently going through something, giving somebody the benefit of the doubt, or even just believing that they are who they said they were, right? And so we're looking through a lens that's biased, right? It's not a fair lens, because we have an upper hand in knowing who this man already is. And so blaming victims for being victims, of a man who is an expert at frauding and defrauding and manipulating people, and he's an expert at doing it because he's been doing it for years and years, is unfair, right? And I'm going to share with you some just research even that I read that I thought was really really interesting. And then I'm going to also talk about like this victimhood of just even how people have been talking recently about Kim Kardashian and the Kanye West dilemma. But before we even do that, right, just talking about the Tinder Swindler and how we kind of judged these women based off of the narrative that was told through Tinder Swindler, right? There's an interesting study by these two people called Nemi and Youngs, right? And so they did a study where they had like a pool of people that they showed a statement to, right? And so the statement was this. It said, Lisa was approached by Dan at a party. Dan gave Lisa a drink spiked with retinol. Later that night, Lisa was assaulted by Dan, right? And so they show a statement like this to a bunch of people, and then want them to kind of give their feedback on what they saw in this and what they thought should have been done differently, right? Or what could Lisa have done to protect herself. So I'll read the statement again. It says, Lisa was approached by Dan at a party. Dan gave Lisa a drink spiked with ropanol, some sort of drug. Later that night, Lisa was assaulted by Dan, right? And so the outcome was that more people assigned responsibility for the crime to the victim, or suggested actions the victim could have taken to have a change in the outcome, right? So when it was phrased that way. But then when the researchers manipulated the language that they used in their example or their statement, right, they found something really interesting that happened, right? So they realized that who was the subject of the majority of the sentence made a difference in how people reacted. So notice that in the first sentence it says Lisa was approached by Dan at a party. Dan gave Lisa a drink. Later that night, Lisa was assaulted. So Lisa, Dan was mentioned at the beginning of the sentence once as the like main person, right? The subject of the sentence. So when they switched it around and said Dan approached Lisa at a party, Dan gave Lisa a drink spiked with retinol, and later that night Dan assaulted Lisa. It was like, when they put the perpetrator as the subject of the sentence, the participants in the research study, the rating of the victim blaming and victim responsibility went down significantly, right? And so what that suggests then was that how we present cases in text or even in speech can change how people think about victims, right? What it means is that the more if the coverage focuses on the victim's experience and story, even if it's in a sympathetic way, the researchers suggest that it might increase the likelihood of victim blaming, right? But stories that focus on the perpetrator more, the perpetrator of the crime more, could be less likely to provoke that reaction of example, the Tinder swindler, right? Isn't that super interesting? How who we put more emphasis on gets more blame. Hey, Bishop Lewis, how are you tonight? Isn't it interesting how we put more blame on who has more emphasis in the story, right? It's just interesting how our brains kind of, the more we hear Lisa, the more we have an opinion about why Lisa shouldn't have done what she did, why she should have taken a cab home that night, why she shouldn't have accepted a drink from a stranger. But when we hear that Dan when the emphasis is on Dan, then people are more reluctant, or actually significantly less likely to blame Lisa for the reason that that this that this event happened. So when we talk about victims and experiences, when we cover topics on victimhood, even in a sympathetic way, it's really important that we talk more about the perpetrator, right? So so now, even in this, for example, this Kim Kardashian, like there's been a few things where, she was robbed in Paris a few years ago. Um, yeah, Ashley, it's really interesting research. I'll send it to you, because I was dumbfounded on how important it is to talk about victims, and how people receive the information. So, and victim blaming. So, um, what is really interesting too is that, just thinking about how we look at even pop culture, right? Especially when it comes to famous or infamous people. There's been a lot of talk about Kim and Kanye, and even Kim in Paris a few years ago, and how she got robbed. And a lot of people were like not feeling sorry for her, because they're like, she's got money. Who cares? You know what I mean? She can get another whatever that she was robbed of. Also, people just had a lot less empathy for her. Um, Even as she's going through this divorce, people have no empathy for her. And it's not even the divorce that people are, mocking, but it's really, a lot of the times, it's what we're actually seeing happen online before us all, with Kanye constantly harassing her, threatening her new relation, or the person that she's in a relationship with now, and doing all these things, and really even encouraging other people to possibly cause harm to her new romantic interest. And really and truly, people are seeing it as entertainment, thinking it's funny, even blaming her, and for his reactions. And what we're seeing before us is an act of domestic violence, right? What we're seeing is abusive behavior, right? It's what people do when they've lost control, when a lot of um abusers, when they've lost control, when they're trying to take back the control of the narrative, will do in order to intimidate other parties, right? And and the commentary that's going on, it's like we're desensitized to people, even the higher that we think that they rank in society, whether it be in their economic status, whether it be in their fame. Like, we just kind of don't even remember that these are human beings, that although that we all kind of stunt for the gram and have a lifestyle that we want to present, but that we all have feelings at the end of the day, and that we have to be able to look at things objectively and not blame people just because of who they are, how much money they have, and what they do for a living. Because what is a victim? Do we think a victim is only somebody who's of a certain race or a certain sex? Do we look at a victim as somebody who's only, of a certain socioeconomic background? Do we look at victims as of crimes, or of abuse, or of, all of the above, as people who are, just lowly? You know what I mean? Or are people who are of all kinds of different classes and races, and socioeconomic backgrounds and educational backgrounds, able to be victims as well? Is it possible that you could be educated, master's, doctorate, and experience rape? And is it possible that you be, maybe you're just a high school graduate, working at a Dollar Tree, and be raped? Can two of them exist and be still valid? Or do we have an image in our mind of what a victim is supposed to look like, and what a victim is not? Who we feel sorry for and who we don't feel sorry for? Because that is also a problem that tells us as a society that there's lacking objectivity and empathy, right? We are lacking objectivity, and we're lacking empathy. Um, and I think that there's way too much what we see out, especially on social media and all that kind of stuff. I think there is way too much emphasis on how to avoid being a victim of a crime, especially for women, right? We were told not how to dress so that we're not victims of crimes, how not we're not to walk at nights so that we're not victims of crimes, and all kinds of stuff, right? Um, and what I think that we need to hear more, and is what we need to hear more of is in fact the perpetrators of the crimes, that the fact that they have agency, right? And that they have agency to and make active decisions to be harmful. So yes, of course, it's wise to be prudent. It's wise to be careful, but if the emphasis is constantly placed on the victim having to protect themselves and not on the predator having agency and making harmful decisions, and what to do about that in our social conversations, and then I think that there's something to be said about that, right? Sorry. The way to avoid, when we want to talk about the way to avoid crime, it almost seems like we can't even leave our house if we want to avoid crime, if we want to avoid being a victim of a crime. And even that sometimes is not possible. Even living in your house, you can be a victim of a crime, right? So I believe that what we must train ourselves, right, to be empathetic. We have to train ourselves to look objectively and not to look through the lenses that are biased, right? And so we have to avoid the tendencies to speculate about what a victim could have done differently to avoid the crime, right? Because if we stop looking at other people's experiences through the lenses of our own lives and our own experiences, then we can now start to become objective, right? And no matter what we want to believe, the world can be a very unjust place, right? It's not very just. And I think it takes some difficult cognitive work. Like, we really have to work on the way we think and the way we see things in our society, right? And work to accept both things, right? That two things can exist. Especially because when we look at people, our heroes, like, people love Kanye, people love Bill Cosby, people love I can't remember his name now, but we all have our heroes and people who have been amazing role models in their careers, right? um and we have a hard time accepting sometimes that those people, or the people that we love, sometimes our own brothers, our own sisters, our own pastors, our own community leaders, that we look up to, we have a hard time accepting that these people sometimes can be perpetrators. And so therefore it's easier to then blame the victim, blame them for because of the people that we love couldn't possibly have done something this wrong, right? Or this evil. And so it's easier to then to shift the blame. So we really, as a society, have to do some difficult cognitive work to accept that bad things sometimes happen to good people, and that seemingly normal people sometimes do bad things. I'll say that again. We have to do difficult cognitive work to accept both that bad things sometimes happen to good people, and that seemingly normal people sometimes do bad things. And I think if we start to accept that, if we start to see that, we already have begun the work of changing how we look at victim, and how we victim blame, um, and we will shift how people are able to come out and tell their stories. People are able to share their testimonies. How people are received because they know that they're coming out to into an atmosphere that is safe, that they can be heard, and they won't feel like they are going to their whole life is going to shatter if they share their experiences, right? And that they're not going to have empathy because their story um, seems smaller than their perpetrator, right? Or they feel smaller than their perpetrator, which should never be that. The perpetrator should be the one who feels small, and the victim have the power in our in our world. And so with that said, I want to thank you so much for being a part of the Lifeboat Live tonight. Thank you for sticking in with me tonight. I know it was a little late, but I want to thank all of you who were on here. Make sure that you hit share. Make sure that you like. Make sure that you subscribe to my YouTube channel, The Lifeboat with Absolutely Arian, and hit the notification bell so that you will know when we go live. I also want to thank you if you are watching on the replay now. I am no longer here, and so I may not see your comments right away, but I'll definitely get to them once I get the notification that you've sent me that you left a comment. So please hit share. Please send it to your friends. Tag them in the comments. And the Lifeboat is back. Season 3 is here. Thank you so much for tuning in. And be good. Ceylon.